is up, YouTube? It's RS Mario, and yes, I know it's long time no see. It's been what, about a month since I did my last video? Yeah, I do apologize for that. I didn't really mean it to be that long, but you know, an existential crisis later, and I'm back though. So, top 10 games of the decade. So I don't usually do a top 10 best games of X year list. I don't usually play nearly as many games in a year to actually do a list like that. So, you know, I just don't do them. But it's been a decade, and I've done a lot of gaming in the past 10 years. So I want to count down my favorite games of the decade. Now, of course, like my other decade list, which will be the anime of the decades, this list will be comprised 50% of my personal picks and 50% of games I think that are just their impact on the industry as a whole. So there are going to be some conventional titles on the list and some not so much so. So, let go. So number 10 is Overwatch. So Overwatch has not only had a pretty big impact on me, but also on kind of the industry as a whole. I mean, it's one of the quickest growing esports in the world, as well as a game that I have poured many hours into. Some not successful as others, but I've poured so many hours into this game. And I have to say, this game brought me back into multiplayer first-person shooters. While that's not purely what it is, it also has like MOBA elements and other stuff like that in it. Overwatch has been a hugely impactful game this decade. I mean, probably not just for me, but for other people too. Red Dead Redemption 2. So, of course, I fought myself over this pick. Because I was like, well, both of these Rockstar games have had a huge impact on the industry in this decade. I mean, Grand Theft Auto 5 is still making money, and it came out 4 years ago? I can't even remember how long ago it came out. It's been a while. It's still making money. And Red Dead Redemption, I mean, just the sheer detail in this world to be as big as it is crazy. And both of them have a lot of impact on this decade, but I chose Red Dead Redemption just because I think it gives us kind of a glimpse into what we can expect when it comes to next generation open worlds. Next generation open worlds, I mean, they may not be bigger, but I think the big thing now is detail. You know what I'm saying? How much you can put into your open world. How detailed is it? You know what I'm saying? How many people are going to be in it? Are they going to be doing their own thing? Can I follow an NPC and they're just doing random, normal human stuff, you know, that they do from their day-to-day lives? How can you make this feel alive? And I think that is the future of open worlds in a next-gen game. And I think Red Dead Redemption was the closest that I've seen in this generation to what we could be seeing in something like a next-gen version of like Cyberpunk or, you know, Skyrim, not Skyrim, Elder Scrolls 6. So, yeah, one of the best games of the decade. So we go from big open world game with an okay narrative to a fairly linear game with an incredible narrative. The Last of Us has had one of the biggest impacts on gaming this generation with its narrative. I mean, Naughty Dog willing to kind of push the envelope when it comes to violence or just all kind of story beats or narrative elements that you don't see a lot in big mainstream games. You know, I mean, yeah, there's tons of violence in video games, but you don't really get to see a lot of, oh, you know, this chick could get sexually assaulted, and there's like, it really gives you that feel of an apocalyptic world where there are monsters, but man is the real monster. You know, when when shit hits the fan and society falls apart. And you get a real feel for that in this game because of just how far they push the envelope. I think this is gonna push gaming narratives forward. Speaking of M-rated games with deep narratives, we have The Witcher 3 Wild Hunt. So this game incorporates all the things I was just talking about. This game has an open world and it has a deep narrative that pushes the envelope in certain ways. And it's one of the most impactful games of the decade. I mean, because The Witcher has inspired tons of game companies to want to embrace more of an open world, deeper narrative style of storytelling. Look at things like Assassin's Creed. I believe Assassin's Creed Odyssey, or was it Odyssey was... I think Odyssey was the one with the Egyptian people. I think that one was the one, that was pretty much inspired by The Witcher. If I'm not mistaken, it was actually said in some interviews that the reason they went that direction was because of Witcher. And games like that are the things like that are the reason why this game is on the list. The Witcher 3 is one of the best games of this decade. So this one right here is more of a personal pick. Because, I mean, while the story is good and the game is somewhat open world but also somewhat linear, it's really more of the personal story that got to me, as well as what it really says about the industry. Is God of War for PlayStation 4. Now, it's kind of a reboot of the franchise on PS4 for the new generation, or I guess this generation and next generation. But one of the reasons why this game really hit me was because, I'm kind of in a phase in my life where I'm kind of a man-child at heart. And so I'm like full blown into like responsibilities, and you know what I'm saying? You don't have that same spark about stuff that you used to have. And seeing a character like Kratos kind of go through a similar change in character has kind of helped me out a lot, I mean, because there's no brothels in this game. Kratos don't clap no cheeks in this game. He controls his anger way better in this game. Kratos has matured in this game. And that kind of hit me. Because I was like, you know what I'm saying? Because in God of War, Kratos is angry, he's Kratos. And seeing Kratos, his character change like this, at first I was like, well, it's just a sign of the time. And then I realized, like, no, this is just a more mature version of Kratos. That, of course, because this game proves that single-player games can still make money. But there was a myth years ago in this decade that single-player games were dying and that everybody was going multiplayer. Overwatch is multiplayer. Destiny is multiplayer. Anthem is multiplayer. The Division is multiplayer. There's so many multiplayer-centric games coming out now that, people were thinking that single-player games are dead. This game proved them wrong. So, I don't play a lot of Minecraft, and I've never really played Undertale. But these two games are some of the most impactful games of the decade because they prove that you don't need to be a big AAA game with like 4K graphics, photorealistic graphics to make an impact in the industry. You don't need that. Alright, these games are some of the most like low res type of low graphics in the industry right now. I mean, one of them is literally like, Super Nintendo looking graphics. And then Minecraft looks like something from a PS1 game. And Minecraft is one of the best selling games of all time behind Tetris, which Need I say more? And they've proven that you don't need to have all the things that most games have to make an impact. Telltale's The Walking Dead. Oh boy. So, talking about narrative games, you can't really leave out pretty much any Telltale game. Telltale, I mean, technically most of their library is really these big-time narrative-based games because there's not a lot of gameplay to it. It's more narrative than game, technically, because essentially it's a walking simulator with really, really nice story modes and, you know, kind of like quick time events. But the story of this game is really why it's on this list, because the story and characters have hit huge this decade. You know what I'm saying? It's like, it's crazy how much we remember Clementine and Lee and the things they had to go through, specifically in Season 1. Season 1 and Season 2 were great, and then it kind of gets choppy as it goes on, and the last season they try to recapture that same magic and doesn't really work out as well. But the narrative of the story of Lee and Clementine is one of the best stories of this decade for video games. Alright, so I know y'all looking at me like I'm crazy because we're getting close to the end of the list. This game is very high on the list, but there are very good reasons for that. Alright, this is kind of a personal pick, but I'm also going to explain to you why it also isn't. And that's Fire Emblem Awakening. So why is Fire Emblem Awakening one of the most impactful games of the decade? Well, first off, it brought waifus into Fire Emblem, and this waifus are kind of what took this channel to new heights. It also saved the Fire Emblem franchise, because technically this was going to be the last Fire Emblem game that we're going to make, because the franchise really hadn't done too well on consoles or handheld before Fire Emblem Awakening. 2, or I guess technically 3, this game also saved the 3DS. This is one of the first big selling games on that console, which itself was selling slowly. So maybe if it wasn't for this game, maybe goodness knows what could have come of the 3DS. I mean, of course the 3DS would have eventually started selling because Pokemon would always sell a console, but this game saved 3DS when it was in a tight spot. Of course, you know this game would have to be on the list. It is one of the biggest Nintendo games of all time, not just of the decade. It is Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild. Breath of the Wild is big for a couple of reasons. Not just because it was the launch title for the Switch that helped propel it to the success that it has now. Not because it remixed the Zelda formula, you know, to do something better, more interesting, influenced by other games, but just because it is awesome. It is an incredible game. It took the Zelda formula, which is kind of a formula for good games anyway, and they amped it up to 11. Like, Nintendo built a whole freaking physics engine for this game. Of course, they use it for other games too, but this game was incredible. And not only it brought more people to Zelda than any other Zelda game before, except for maybe Ocarina of Time. And it's one of the biggest games of the decade.
But there's one they fear. In their tongue, he's Dovahkiin, Dragonborn.
So, the game that is the most impactful game of the decade, or the game that has had probably one of the biggest impacts of the decade. I already said that. That sounds weird. Skyrim. I mean, what other game could be on at this spot on the list? I mean, Skyrim has influenced so many games, not just this decade. So many games on this list have influence from Skyrim. Okay, I mean, The Witcher. One of the reasons why CD Projekt Red decided to go open world with The Witcher and blow the world up the way they did is because of Skyrim. You know what I'm saying? Hell, freaking Far Cry is literally called Skyrim with guns. That's a marketing statement. Alright? That's not just some kind of thing I came up with. Somebody at Ubisoft was like, bro, this is gonna be Skyrim with guns. And they did it. Kind of. I mean, even Breath of the Wild, the number 2 game on this list, was influenced by Skyrim. Ayanuma has said it, well, I think it was Ayanuma that actually said it himself, that the game took some influence from Skyrim. You know, Skyrim kicked open the doors for open world RPGs. Yes, there have been open world RPGs before, but Skyrim is the one that introduced it to the masses. And to me. I mean, you know, yes, Skyrim has its flaws. It's not a perfect game. No Bethesda game is. Expecting a perfect Bethesda game is like expecting, I don't know, a perfect Shyamalan movie. That's not gonna happen. It's probably a very bad comparison. But yeah, to be honest though, you know what I'm saying, this game does have its flaws. And the story is not the best. It's probably not as good as some of the games that it actually inspired. But the thing that brings people to Skyrim over and over again is just that it's a great game to play. The gameplay is not the best in the Elder Scrolls franchise, but it's easy for you to pick it up and play and feel like a badass, which is important for gamers because, I mean, these games are kind of power fantasies for us. So being able to pick up a game quickly and feel incredible is important. You know, also, I mean, just think about the fact that this game has been ported to every system imaginable and it always continues to sell. Hell, next year, or technically this year, is probably the 10th, next year, 2021 is the 10th anniversary of Skyrim. I guarantee you there's gonna be a re-release. I guarantee you on the PlayStation 5 and Xbox Series X. Like, and people are probably gonna buy it because it's Skyrim. Skyrim is the most impactful video game of the decade. Fight me about it. Come at me in the comments. So that's about it. Like, comment, subscribe. Hit me up on Twitter because I don't know if YouTube is going to be definitely telling people I make videos at this point. Especially since I've been gone for so long. Expect my next video, top 20 anime of the decade. That should be interesting. Like, comment, subscribe. And as always, folks, keep it real.